If you're working at Google and you don't have a firm plan in place for how you're using the Google 401k and your equity compensation from Google, you could be missing out big.
So today we're going to talk about Google's 401k as well as equity compensation management, RSUs, or as Google likes to call them, GSUs.
My name is Ben and I'm a CRPS,
I'm Allison and I'm a CFP.
and this is the Abundance Mindset Podcast.
So getting the privilege to work with a lot of clients across different tech sectors and different companies, we're able to look at a lot of benefits and also we were able to just kind of compare culture and who seems to be having a little bit more fun. And it seems like Googlers are having fun. They're really driven, motivated, highly talented people. So not that others aren't. It's just, sometimes the culture can promote that or not.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think there's a lot of market podcasts are basically Mag 7 podcasts right now. So everyone's talking about oh, Meta's earnings and Amazon doing this and that. And it's kind of a fun and unique vantage point to just talk to just real actual people that work there. And yeah, newsflash, if you don't know somebody working at Google or Meta or Microsoft, they're very normal people. But very, generally very smart and motivated people, like you mentioned.
Very direct. So I really like that. Work well with direct people. But yeah, that said, today we're gonna speak to the Googlers, and we're able to look through their summary plan description of their 401k. We're able to navigate and talk through equity compensation. These are the two areas. There's a lot of benefits at Google, and we could talk about so much on this episode, but we're gonna talk just about those two things because I think that's where there's a ton of planning and also a lot of room for error.
Right. Your employer is not your financial plan, but your employer is a big part of your financial plan. And particularly Google, I mean, they've got some intricacies in both their 401k as well as their typical equity comp. And there's a lot of different ways they could structure it. You might have equity comp if you're at Google. That's outside of what we'll talk about today. But some of the general ways that they do things create complexities. Complexity isn't bad, but complexity is opportunity for error as well as opportunity for optimization. So we want to move you toward optimization, not error, which is why we're going to talk about these today.
Yeah, so let's start with the 401k. So, I always take a 401k in layers, right? How I'm adding to what investments and what's the tax wrapper we're going to utilize, right? And Google's got a lot of different options. They're one of the 401ks that offer a mega backdoor. There's a lot of different layers that they actually do offer because not all 401ks are created equal. So the first layer, I'm just thinking contributions, right? I'm logging into Vanguard and I'm going to set my contribution because the plan, summary plan description, it says, hey, if you do nothing, HR is just going to enroll you at 10% and it's going to be in pre-tax, right? So just automatic. So that's the first thing I'm going in, I'm saying, what's my contribution going to be? And also, even within that, there's some nuances because how much am I going to add? And what's my salary? Am I electing my bonus to go in here, right? Or for a lot of clients, we work it off their salary because then we can be really precise throughout the year. And then also how much, like the sheer percentage amount based off of my salary am I going to add? Because first mistake is maxing out too early, right? So I'm contributing throughout the year and I want to contribute every month. Every month of the year, I want to be adding to my 401k. I don't want to max out too early. I want to hit it right on the nose at the end of the year because I want a dollar cost average. I want to buy the market at every up and down that I physically possibly can with my paycheck. And so I want a dollar cost average, the best price throughout the year. Also, this isn't, historically speaking, there can sometimes be some more volatility in the fall, right? Summer might be a little more flat. So I don't want to max out right before the volatility. I want to be able to buy on sale too at the end of the year, fall into winter.
Yeah, Google's 401k has a funny high amount of customization, but also high amount of default action. So a 10% automatic enrollment is not uncommon. What is uncommon is that Google has a second auto enrollment, and that auto enrollment happens into after tax if you hit the IRS maximum too soon. So not necessarily a bad thing, but something you should plan for. So after tax, most people are familiar with the regular contribution limit in 2026. That's 24,500. After tax is a bucket that some 401ks, many don't, but some 401ks open up, which allows you to add above that limit. Altogether, in 2026, your 401k contributions cannot exceed 72,000, but there's a lot of space between 24,500 and 72,000, also including any employer match in that number too. So Google is somewhat unique in that, say, and if you've got a high enough compensation at Google, that 10% auto enrollment might just get you over the 24,500 cap if your salary is higher than 245,000 to be precise. But yes, Google will actually auto enroll you in after tax if you do nothing. So up to 6%. And yeah, I would say this is an uncommon default action.
So coming back to the layers, right? We've talked about contribution, right? We want to, strategically max throughout the year. The second layer is this tax layer. So Ben's getting into the tax layer, and this is a really important one to work out with your financial planner on which tax levers you want to pull. Because the first, so think of it as you have at Google, at least you have 72,000. That's the IRS max, the total IRS max. A little more if you're able to do catch up. Right, for a little bit more senior employees or who might be older, but otherwise 72,000, right? And this is the bar you have to fill up. So I'm thinking about which tax wrappers, which tax levers do I want to utilize in my financial plan. So the first 24,500, that's the first tax lever. Am I going to do Roth? Am I going to do pre-tax? Right? And so that's a choice. Am I going to do a mix? And so that is the first 24,500. And Google's match, that is whether you choose pre-tax or Roth, you are still going to receive the Google match, right? Because they're matching a dollar amount, a contribution. They're not matching which tax type you choose, right? So that's the first 24,500. Then you have the match. And then you have, a nice backdoor, a nice room, wiggle room into that $72,000 number. And that's the after tax. Now, I do want to just put a caveat here and say, if you are contributing, which you might be automatically contributing and not knowing into that after tax, that 6% auto enrollment, if you're already hitting the 24,500, or you might just be going for that 72,000 number, right, which is made up of the first 24,500, Google's match, and then you have whatever wiggle room you have left, right? And so if that's you, what's really key is this is the second tax lever, and you need to decide and know how that mega backdoor works, because if you do nothing, it will just sit in after tax. And 9.9 times out of 10, we don't want after tax. What's the purpose of after tax? It just sits there, and and then it's taxed again. It's there's a button you can press, or sometimes you have to call Vanguard, right? And you need to know what the in-plan conversion feature is, because you can actually, once you add $1 into after tax, you can immediately convert it to Roth that same day, which then moves it into a tax-free space where it's never taxed again. Right? So I could talk so much more on this, but you just need to know what that is, and you have to be aware, especially when you're working with your financial planner in the tax lever space.
Yeah. So you've got pre-tax Roth and after-tax available to you, as you're saying, Allison. In most cases, vast majority of most cases, you're going to want to have that after-tax converted immediately to Roth, which Google's 401k does have that feature. So consult with your financial advisor, but you very likely want to take advantage of that if you aren't already taking advantage of it. But then, yeah, it is a question of whether you want that 24/5 to be in pre-tax, Roth, a combination, and then you're automatically going to get pre-tax from Google's match. So lots of different tax going on. Worth noting, too, that Google's 401k offers in-plan conversions of all of these types. So if it's in your financial plan, if you are wanting to soak up more favorable tax brackets, you can convert any of your pre-tax funds into Roth via the Google 401k. That's not something we recommend you go and just do on your own without forethought and a plan, but it is a feature within the 401k.
We did an episode on Roth conversions that might help you, think about the complexity of whether or not to, start having that conversation within your plan. But that said, that's the second layer, and there's a lot that you can do within the 401k and your personal tax planning. There could be a year you want to switch, toggle between pre-tax and Roth, and then utilize the after tax in a different way, or outside of that. So
One
there's a
one
lot you
more
can do there.
one more note before we move on to the investment layer, which is where I know you're going next. We've been talking about a lot about like, okay, what does it look like to really fully maximize the bucket? That might, everyone's in different spots, different lifestyle constraints, different budgets. Maybe you're supporting an aging parent. There's so many circumstances, right? Google has so if you're not in a place to fully maximize after tax, it is worth noting that just your contribution up to the regular IRS limit has one of the most generous employer matches to it of companies that we've seen anyway. So Google's match is 50% of the IRS maximum. So in 2026, that is 11,750 given you by your employer. Again, that's more than most employers are giving. Secondly, and also not super uncommon, but a little uncommon, you're 100% vested in Google's employer contributions or matches right away. So very common to have either 3-year cliff vesting or graded vesting. So, maybe you've seen like the 20, 40, 60, 80, 100%. That's just a timetable where your employer contributions aren't fully yours until you're at the company for a long time. So yeah, maybe this is in line with Google's culture, because they are very people first, right? They're like, yeah, if we're gonna give you money, it's yours. So yeah, I would encourage anyone at Google who has the capacity to save to that regular, IRS limit to do so, because it's a very generous employee contribution supporting that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we've talked about the contribution layer, the tax wrapper layer, which has a lot of different levers in it that you can utilize within your financial plan. And then the third layer I want to discuss is the investment layer. Don't want to give any recommendations, but actually, literally in the Google SPD. So you can go and you can get the 401k doc that just says everything about all these features, right? Or you can listen to this podcast that will be dated as of the date of release. But ultimately, so the 401k SPD summary plan description, it says you should carefully evaluate the investment alternatives available to you under the plan and consult with your financial advisor to determine which funds meet your particular investment objectives. I think every 401k SPD should have that clause.
Yeah, Google's really nice, but they're not going to take responsibility for your investment selections. So they're very clear that that one's on you, buddy.
So you log into Vanguard and there's options for you to choose from an investment list, right? So the investment layer, there's the target date, the Vanguard target date, just life cycle funds, right? They're on autopilot. Let's say I'm retiring in 2060. Okay, I pick 2060 and it's gonna just be on autopilot and get more conservative as you get closer to that date. But that date's really far away, and I don't really want bonds and cash that it holds in the portfolio and then buys more each year of bonds and cash. I want to save that for, 5 to 10 years out from retirement, right? And so I might not want that. I might not want the cookie cutter kind of autopilot fund. And sometimes even, that rebalancing feature can cost more. And so I might want to look at the other indices and build my own portfolio, or again, work with my financial planner to say, hey, let's use these indices. So they have a few, right, to pick from where you can create your own mix, right? Using large cap and mid cap and small cap and international, right? And creating your own portfolio, but maybe you do or you don't want bonds. And so this is something where there's the target date layer, there's the indice fund layer, and then there's also a brokerage link option that you can utilize. It actually has it go through Charles Schwab instead of Vanguard, where you can get a plethora of options. It kind of opens up a whole new door if you're either talented in this space or you're working with a financial advisor. That's a whole other door to opening up a lot more funds than just the couple listed. And so those are the options. What I would recommend is familiarizing yourself with the 10-year plus returns of these funds, which you can find. Vanguard will provide performance. They'll provide the fund costs, right? So the expense ratios associated with your choices, right? Or if there's any, administration fees, right? So all the information is there, but this is something, whether you're taking it into your own hands or you're bringing it to your financial planner, I'm biased for the latter. ultimately you want to maximize, right? You want to maximize your contributions. You want to maximize the tax levers available, and you want to maximize the investment options you have available within this bucket, in accordance with your other buckets, your other investment accounts, right? Or maybe your spouse, right? If they have a 401k and they have these funds and you have these funds, you want to maximize, how can you make them work together, right? That's investment planning. And tax planning done well is trying to maximize, everybody's holdings and tax wrappers to benefit you.
Right. Yeah. And so, Google might do a lot for you as an employer. They're not going to choose investments for you unless it's that, kind of cookie cutter target date fund. Maybe that's the right choice for you. But there's really, I'd say, kind of three layers of complexity, right? You can go really simple with the target date fund. You can build your own mix of Vanguard funds inside of the 401k, or you can go all out with the brokerage link. But again, certainly not providing any specific advice here. Just know that the level of complexity and responsibility steps up as you step those levels up.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say about the 401k is just don't forget to add a beneficiary. But outside of that, it's a great tool. I really like planning with the Google 401k because there's so many different options and changes that you can make throughout the year.
So if you can't tell, we like Google. We like Googlers. Financial plans built with Google as a piece of the puzzle tend to be really fun financial plans. And when I say fun, it means there's opportunities, there's efficiencies, and that stuff is super fun for us. So yeah, if you're listening, you work at Google and you're already thinking, oh man, like either my 401k has been unintentional or I want to start to level it up. We offer free strategy assessments that you can request via our website. That's at abundancewm.com. So you can go there, check out our website. And if you want to talk about your position at Google, what you're trying to accomplish, and get our perspective on what a financial plan would look like for you and what good next steps would be, you can navigate to our website and find us via there. We'd be happy to talk to you.
Absolutely. So our second topic we're going to talk about in this episode is equity compensation. Equity compensation is really important within a plan, especially when I'm thinking about tax planning for one, and the strategy on if and when you sell your GSUs, right? And then also in investment planning, diversification, right? You want to make sure that you're not betting your financial plan on one company, as great as Google is, right? And so there's two layers and two lenses how I would start to view, if I worked at Google, how I would view my equity compensation, my GSUs. But I'd want to have a strategy, and so GSUs.
Yeah. I will say Google is the only company I'm aware of that has taken the standard name of restricted stock unit and said, actually, like, okay, yeah, under the hood, it's an RSU, but they just call it a Google stock unit, is a unit of Google stock. So makes total sense. So yeah, we call them GSUs. They are RSUs. And of course, Google can offer other equity compensation types, stock options. They probably are far beyond some of the founder type early equity that a company might offer, but stock options and GSUs or RSUs are going to be the most common ones. We're going to focus in on Google's RSUs or their GSUs here. We have a separate episode on stock options that are widely applicable if you have those from Google as well that you can go listen to. But what's unique about Google stock options? A couple things. So every company can set vesting schedules for their RSUs, or in this case, GSUs. In the grants that we've seen, it's really common actually to see monthly vesting schedules. That's more frequent than most employers. It's not a bad thing, but it increases complexity. The reason it does is that you earn ordinary income every time a GSU vests. So if you have more vesting periods throughout the year, that's more opportunities for you to earn income that is variable based on Google stock price on the day of vest. So not uncommon to see annual or quarterly vests in RSUs at other companies. That kind of is simple. Like, okay, like one vest in the fall. Okay, I know. Oh, the stock price was 131 or what have you at that time. Pretty easy to watch and manage the tax impact. With Google stock units, you have impact happening frequently throughout the year, which again is not a bad thing, but is a complex thing.
Yeah, so planning is really important here. And with these GSUs vesting monthly, some people forget that at vest, right, as you're getting these GSUs, it's adding to your ordinary income.
Yeah, and so when we're doing tax planning, particularly for people receiving RSUs, and I'd say the complexity steps up for GSUs here, we want to take a really good look at how that's shaping out as we get toward the end of the year, so that we don't, we might have taxable moves that we want to make, whether it's selling investments at gain or maybe doing a Roth conversion. But your ordinary income can vary wildly based on Google stock price as
Mm,
these grants start to mount on top of each other or stack on top of each other. And so when you have this kind of equity comp, you just want to be extra watchful before you make additional taxable moves, because you could inadvertently pressure a tax bracket that you don't want to pressure, or move yourself into a phase out in the tax code that you don't want to do. So yeah, this just creates income complexity that is far and above just the typical salary bonus that might happen at a company that isn't as free with equity as Google is.
right. And even making sure that your withholdings are right.
Right. Okay, that's a big one. It's common, we've seen, for people to default to the 22% federal tax withholding for their GSUs. And that might be the right federal tax withholding for you, and it also might not be, particularly if you're getting into higher income earning, but you're not making over $1 million in a year. You're likely not going to, default your percentage upward to the appropriate amount, and that, especially as stock becomes a larger and larger part of your compensation package, you can easily get yourself into penalty territory by under withholding, owing a bunch of tax at the end of the year, and then also gain a penalty on top of that from the IRS for not withholding enough tax throughout the year.
This happens, and it's a separate withholding that you have to be proactive about setting. So this is something, when we're doing this for clients, we're talking with them and we're talking with their CFP, and then we're making sure we have the right withholding, because it's also based on all these other factors in your financial plan.
Yep, yep. And worth noting, regardless of what custodian you prefer to use for yourself, Google actually has their own kind of special instance of Charles Schwab. So, maybe you've got assets custodied at Charles Schwab. This is actually kind of a separate portal, and that's where they mediate their stock program from. So you'll need to ensure that you're getting in there, figuring out how to track it and manage it, and get your various withholdings set appropriately.
So there's two lenses that we look through, right? We've talked a little bit about the tax planning lens, right? Are you going to sell immediately at vest? Are you going to sell after a year? And all of these decisions matter, because it's how much, it could be how much tax you're going to pay on that on that stock sell. And so this is really important, and it's not just what the price of the stock is. It's also looking at what's your ordinary income, what other gains that are happening. So it's a tax landscape with your whole picture of your whole financial plan. So that's the tax lens. And then the second lens is the investment or diversification layer, right? Because again, let's say I work at Google, I've got $1 million of Google stock built up. Okay, I'm thinking I should diversify because I don't want anything hinging on its stock price. So then there's this layer of not just when to sell and how much to sell, but it's moving from, Google to an outside portfolio, right? And diversifying. Some Googlers genuinely tell us that this keeps them up at night, because they're kind of familiar with, the tax ramifications. They're familiar with, I should probably diversify. But it's just, it's almost analysis paralysis, where they just can't keep a move. And so it's keeping them up at night. And we've heard that. So hopefully this helps you start to think about how and when, and, how, it's related to everything in financial plan.
Yeah, yeah, and we actually did a separate, episode on employer stock, and just ways to think about when to hold, when to sell, how to set like strategic guardrails. So we'll link that one in the show notes. I'd say a lot of that really applies. Similarly, if you're a Googler, it's great to believe in your company. It's great to want to have, some stake in your company's growth, but you don't want to have your retirement hinging on your company. The client you're mentioning, who is kept up at night by his Google stock, he'd been there over a decade, and just hadn't really sold his stock units, and realized that he actually, had accumulated wealth such that like an earlier retirement is actually possible for him. But, now he's starting to, be kept up at night by his stock, because, moves in the tens or hundreds of thousands as Google moves. He's watching his retirement surge back and his retirement slip away, and ultimately he needed a much more measured approach to how he was going to handle his Google stock units, so that his retirement is not sitting on the shoulders of a single, albeit great and big company.
And some really niche strategies like direct indexing, which if you don't know what that is, you need to go listen to that, because when you get into these equity compensation conversations where you've got a lot of one stock built up with a lot of gain, you're going to need to look at direct indexing.
Yeah. Yep. So like I said earlier, if you're listening to this, you're like, oh man, my 401k is not optimized, or I need to level it up. And maybe I'm sitting on a lot of GSUs, or I just don't know what I'm doing with them or why. And maybe you got a penalty on your tax return this last year. These are all solvable problems. You can have a strategy, whether it's with us or someone else. We'd encourage you to take that next step to figure out how to make your financial plan something that you put out into the world, as opposed to just reacting to all these things that happen to you. So yeah, if you'd like to speak with us about it, you can access a free strategy assessment via our website at abundancewm.com. Hope this was helpful, and thank you for Googling for us.